So welcome to my round 2 recap video of my exploits in my Swift DB4 Formula Atlantic in the Formula Open New Zealand series at Circuit Chris Amon, otherwise known as Manfeild in fielding. I'll just go over a couple of things I was thinking about. One of the things was, at round 1 I'd had so many handling issues. I'd sort of resolved it, but I didn't really get it resolved in the weekend. But during the week I'd found that my clutch pack in the diff was problematic. There was shims that were binding up where they shouldn't, and I was having issues there. And so I fixed that, but I'd left the rest of the car exactly the same because I really wanted to back and actually prove if that was the issue. I'd also been told when I arrived that the track surface had turned to crap with the super trucks there. They tend to drop a lot of diesel or fumes or whatever they do. The track's really dusty. It's like driving in the rain. And I'd only had one test day under my belt at this track. So I wasn't too sure, like, did I have enough seat time? Was I going to pick it up quickly enough? And all the other front runners were on new tyres, whereas I was just running the same old tyres I'd run at the round previous, and they were the same tyres that I'd been practicing on before the season. So there was a lot to go on, but after about probably 1, maybe 2 corners, it felt amazing. I'd finally resolved the issue with the diff. The only caveat to that was that because I'd left the car exactly the same, it actually wasn't high enough, and sort of after a couple of laps I was grounding out once I got up to speed in the fast corners, and that ultimately led to this. After the high-speed spin, it was clear that I needed to dial it back a notch, bank some laps, get it back to pits, and raise the car. I did just that, but I was really happy that I managed to put it in second place, which would see me starting alongside Tom for race 1. After raising the car and re-corner weighting it, it was time to head out for race 1. Now, because I belt myself up and do everything myself, and totally by choice, I have to turn on the camera quite a bit before we actually go out, just because I can't reach it to start it when it's time. I caught this moment of the mechanics of Josh's car sitting on the rear wing and noticing that it was flexing. It turned out that it was actually missing a couple of bolts, and it could have been a liability if they hadn't got those bolts in before race start. But as you see coming up, it wasn't the first car to have a loose wing. As I pulled up alongside Tom for the start of race 1, he also seemed to be plagued by the lack of bolts holding a wing on. As you can see, his front wing was flapping around, and I was trying to sign language, but I had no idea how I was going to communicate that your front wing is flapping around. I tried pointing at it, pointing at my front wing, did a flapping sign, I did a braking sign. Josh behind thought I was trying to signal that we were going too slow for the safety car start. Tom thought I was just trying to intimidate or gone a bit crazy, but I felt like I'd tried, because if I had seen it and not tried to signal anything, I would have felt bad if something bad had really actually come of it. But as you see on lap 1, it was a decent battle, and I'll let that play. Now, just doing a quick freeze frame here to explain what was going on in my mind at the time, because there were 2 major things. One was, when I go side by side through Splash, I didn't quite have the right gearing. It was always a bit flat, unless I got a straight run. It just wasn't there, so people could get a run on me. But the second was, I was really conscious about Tom being in a position where he could dive up the inside, which he potentially would have been. If I'd gone right to cover, he would have had the speed to go up the inside into the hairpin. My primary concern here was that his front wing was going to break off, get stuck under the front wheels, and he was going to torpedo me. Through no fault of his own, I must make that clear. It wouldn't have been his fault at all, but I was just not going to put myself in a situation where it was possible. So just to replay in slow-mo what happened there on turn 1, lap 2. I was going in pretty hot. This is probably the latest break I've ever done, and I was really starting to get to grips with what this car can now do. I go deep down the outside. He's obviously seen me. His wing seems to be acting as a ground effect plane. I think it was still highly effective, even though it was on one stay. But out of the slow corner, he sort of just starts to shift me wide, and what it feels like after, like in retrospect, I think what he was leaving was a car width for a FT50, but the Swift DB4 is about 20-30 centimeters wider, and you can see we clip wheels there, and it surprises him because he instantly goes across to the right. But I don't think there was anything else I could really do there, and it sort of put me off for the rest of the race. I decided just to follow along, wait for his front wing to fall off, and then pass him, which is what ultimately happened. I was starting again from P2 for race 2, and this time I made a much better start of it. So good, in fact, that in hindsight I should have cut Tom off, but at the same time a DB4 does punch a big hole in the air, and it does unsettle them quite a bit in brakes, so there was 50-50, and I chose to take the safer route, which was to give him room and go around the outside. Unfortunately for me, someone had put a bit of oil or something on the outside of that corner because I could not get any grip out of it, and Tom and Josh almost gets past me, but I just continued to drive on and sort of settle into the race. With a few laps playing follow the leader behind Tom, I started to figure out a lot of places I could gain time and a lot of places I could make a move. Unfortunately, the cars were so similar that like whatever move I had to do had to be set up corners before in order to get a run. And in all the laps prior to that, I was sort of testing it out. As we start here at turn 1, I was testing what it was going to be like to be behind him, initially under brakes, and then to dive to the inside. And then I went through this lap just figuring out, and then I figured out of the hairpin I could pull first, which would match him down the back straights, and then that would allow me to get beside him into the final corner, run high side, which would squeeze him low, and then cut back across up the straight and dive him into one. Unfortunately for me though, the safety car had to come out because someone had spun at turn 1, so this race was sort of ridden off and I ended up with second place. So whilst it was disappointing to finish under safety car, I was buzzing from that last few laps of just every lap I was gaining so much in terms of speed and just getting more and more out of the car. I walked away with fastest race lap, which put me on P1 for race 3, but unfortunately I don't have any video because I must have double pressed the button on the camera. But to summarize, I can go through that shortly, but for those that aren't interested in the summary of race 3, you can keep up to date with what I'm doing on the Swift. I've got a Facebook page, Swift DB4 number 31 or hash 31, and I post more frequently on that as to what I'm up to, but I'll go through what happened in race 3. Tom got the much better start than me, and it was apparent from lap 1 that I'd suddenly found a lot more pace, and I was getting up beside him much more than I got beside him in race 2, and it sort of was like that for 7 laps straight, until I figured out that to get past him I could potentially do it on the hairpin, because he wasn't covering the outside ripple strip when he was accelerating through. So I decided to try going around the outside by using first, and then on the shift to second I just straightened the wheel and lose traction and use the loss of traction to rotate the car up the outside of him. It was a pretty wild move, and I managed to make it stick and got up beside him, but he just wasn't probably expecting me to be on that ripple strip, and our wheels interlocked and we dragged each other off the track. I bent my steering arm, but I don't think he had any real damage, but he managed to get out on the track, back on track a lot sooner than I, and ended up with the win. But despite that even more anticlimactic finish, it was pretty wild the last lap I did when I wasn't behind him. I just sort of threw everything I had at it. Even with the bent steering, I set my fastest lap of the weekend, and I just left nothing. Like, going into the last corner, I was full throttle for half of it, which is like a good 20 meters more than I was doing all weekend, and then I just jammed it into third and accelerated full throttle on the exit and four-wheeled, like, slid onto the exit ripple strip to finish the lap and finish the race. And then I was like thinking, I wish I'd done that all weekend, because it was like the most wild feeling ever in that car. So I got a lot to build on for Taupo, and if I can start Taupo how I finished Manfeild, it should be an exciting weekend.